1848 was the year of the greatest fire in Albany's history. It happened on August 17th of that year. The story here is that a washerwoman was working in a shed at the Albion Hotel at Herkimer Street and Broadway in the South End when the laundry that she was working with, or her bonnet, depending on which story you read, caught on fire. And she was so scared by this that she ran out onto the street but was unable to verbalize that there was a fire going on. I'm not sure. She must have ditched her bonnet before she ran out of the building, and by the time help arrived, the fire had already consumed the shed and some of the buildings around, and it moved very quickly from that location all the way up Broadway, eventually hitting the basin where the Port of Albany was at the time. Several hundred boats were parked in the water there. It was the canal basin where the Erie Canal emptied into the Hudson River. The boats began to burn. The bridges that connected the pier to the mainland also burned, as did the buildings on the pier itself. And of course, these buildings were filled with flammable materials such as flour and lumber, and many of the occupants of those buildings, who of course were working because it was the middle of the day, had to flee for their lives. They couldn't get over the bridge because the bridge that connected the pier to the mainland at Hamilton Street started on fire, as did the one at State Street at the foot of the hill. Between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, the winds, which had whipped the fire all the way up from Herkimer Street to Hudson Avenue, died down and switched direction. And about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, torrential rain started. And it's said that this is what really prevented the buildings or the fire from being any worse than it was. By the end of the day, anywhere from 400 to 600 buildings were destroyed, depending on which articles you read. The business district of the city, which existed pretty much south of State Street, was completely consumed by this fire, as were any number of residences, small businesses, in addition to the retail area of the city. This also included a lot of industrial buildings as well, and those industries and businesses were completely destroyed. The fire had a significant effect on the city. Obviously, a good portion of the business district was wiped out, and that shocked the people who were not expecting anything. One day you're there, and the next day the whole place is burned down. But two things came out of the fire of interest. One was the institution of a paid fire department. Up to this time, the firemen were all volunteers. The city paid for equipment, hoses, firehouses, and anything else that was needed, but the men themselves were volunteers. At this time, as a result of the fire, an actual paid fire department was instituted. However, the volunteer companies really resented the fact that there was going to be a paid fire department, and this only lasted 3 years, so it was disbanded in 1851 and returned to an all-volunteer fire company until 1867, when the paid professional fire department was formed. Another thing that came out of the fire was the institution of a larger fire limit. In other words, no wood buildings could be built within what was then referred to as the congested area of the city, which of course downtown would have been known as that. So that was the institution of a fire line that consisted pretty much of everything east of Lark Street, between Madison Avenue and Clinton Avenue, which at that time embraced almost the entire settled and built-up area of the city. It was definitely the most devastating fire in the city's history, because anywhere from 400 to 600 buildings were burned. And it did have a long-term effect of restricting where wood buildings could be built.